I'm Scott Sheridan,
I'm Carson Lilly.
and we did our lab over the Fiedler Learning Commons, the front desk people, and there's two people that work at these desks, and we just asked them a couple questions to start off. And we first did the checklist to start the lab, and we asked the worker whether or not certain things were present in their workstation. And there were 22 items on this checklist, and only 5 were missing, which is pretty good. For the workstation, it was rated as fairly good, I guess. And the things missing were mainly about the wrists and the keyboard position. So the first thing that was missing was the wrist was bent more than 10 degrees, and then the wrist supports were not there. So that was one of the biggest things that we saw, and without the wrist supports, you can create like carpal tunnel syndrome, which in the long run will cost up to thousands of dollars rather than just getting a wrist.
So after we completed the checklist, we moved on to a scoring component of the lab where we studied several components of the workstation, including the worker, the physical aspect, and the visual aspect. We began with the worker, scoring their habits and then their position as they worked, just giving them a score from 0 to 3, 0 being excellent and 3 being bad. All of the types of habits were weighted, so all we did was multiply the weight by the score that we gave them to get the total score. The habits for the worker came to a total of 10, and the position came to 4, for a total worker score of 14, which was rated as fair when we concluded that. Next, we moved to the physical workstation design. Same kind of things before. Several components had weights, and then we just gave them a score again from 0 to 3. The total work area score was 12, and the chair score was 0. And then finally, we scored the mouse, which was 2, and that brought our total physical workstation score to 14, which was rated as good. Finally, we scored the visual aspect of the workstation. Essentially, there was just one component to that, which was the monitor. Our total score for that was 1, and that was rated as good as well. So finally, once we were done with all of the various components of the workstation, we added them all together, and our total workstation and habit score combined was 29, which was also rated as good. So even though our workstation was rated as good when we completed the entire scoring table, there are several things that can be done to the workstation that would score it excellent.
And then the next thing we asked the workers at the front desk was how they diversified their tasks, which this kind of went into account for like the economic part, because you wouldn't want to like buy something that costs too much when the worker's not actually doing like those tasks for like an immense amount of time. And she said that she uses the computer 30% of the time. She's there to check out laptops to people and change people's engineering passwords. And then she answers students' questions about and talks on the phone about 20% of the time. And then she's cleaning about 5% of the time, and then the other 45% of the time she pretty much had to herself.
So next, when we were studying the workstation, we wanted to determine whether or not it was accessible for any workers with potential disabilities. And for that, we referenced the Americans with Disabilities Act that we found in the textbook. And we found that the 3 most important components to that were the desk height, the distance to the walls and the surroundings, and then the heights of drawers that were commonly used. And we felt that with the workstation in the Fiedler Commons, it would be fairly accommodating to workers with disabilities. We felt that the one thing that could be improved was an adjustable workstation height. At this point, the workstation height is static. There's no changing that, which could be problematic to a worker in a wheelchair. But for the most part, there's no strenuous reaching. The work is all pretty, easy to do within the dimensions of the body, so we feel that the workstation is fairly accommodating.
And then we just had some recommendations and conclusions. We kind of hit some of the points, but the main ones were we're going to get an adjustable keyboard tray, which you can see in this picture right here. And it has the wrist supports, and you can move the keyboard up and down. And those were some of the things missing in the checklist. And then those costed about $180 for one of them, and there's only 2 workstations, so we thought it was reasonable to buy those, because down the road for carpal tunnel could be more expensive than just the $360 that those keyboard trays are. And then these are just some of the pictures of what the workstation actually looks like.